So welcome everyone to Extreme Class Makeover Dental Edition. Um, so meet dental materials. It's a subject that's about as exciting as watching dental cement dry. It's just a very dry topic. And let me show you some example slides of the information. So here's a slide, and using a template, which is all well and good, but templates can kind of are limiting if you follow them as they were intended. Here's a slide with a reaction going on for this material called dental amalgam. And even though a reaction's on this slide, this is not a very exciting slide. Here's another slide. Oh, look, it's a bullet point list. Nothing thrills me more than staring at a bullet point list. And so let me pause you right here. And if you flip it around and you look at your audience after giving a presentation like this, they're not going to be that engaged. And as kind of Dr. Lepko was mentioning, I specialize in trying to do things to make lectures more engaging, theatrical educational presentations, or TEP as I like to call it. But anyway, so the other issue with this course is not only is the material very dry, it's basically like taking material, talking about its chemical properties, reactions, yada, yada, yada. I also have to teach it at the great time of like 3 o'clock in the afternoon after they've already had a morning of other classes. And then right before mine are 2 other classes as well. So there were a lot of challenges when I took on this course back in 2011. So what can we do? Can we turn this class around and take it from Drab to Fab? Find out today on Extreme Class Makeover. So first, I want to start off by, I mentioned earlier that I have a connection to librarians, so I'm going to briefly explain why. And that's because back in high school, I was actually a library aide for at least 4 years. So I was the guy who helped our main librarians out by doing the overdue books list, back and having it type it out by hand. This is back when card catalogs were a thing, and stamping the due dates onto little cards. That I remember all that. So that was an exciting time for me, particularly when we did like the Scholastic Book Fair and that came into town. That was always fun. But that's not all. In college, I went to Duke University for undergrad, and actually my first job there was at Perkins Library, which is actually to the right of the chapel that you see here. I worked in periodicals, and so worked with magazines, newspapers, and periodicals and microfiche, if any of y'all remember that. I'm sure you do. But I'm also a member of the board for the Waring Historical Library, which is located here on MUSC's campus. So obviously this is a library that's focused on preserving medical history, and obviously members of the committee are also heavily involved with this group as well. So I love my librarians. So anyway. So a little disclaimer, I'm not paid by any of the companies that I'm going to be talking about or any of the books that I'm going to talk about. But as Dr. Lepker mentioned, I'm a huge Disney fan. So you'll probably hear me talk about it a lot. So, there you go. So, also one question I get about these presentations is, what special program are you doing? And just so you know, this is all done in PowerPoint. Now, some of the special, there might be embedded videos in it that might kind of lend itself to more animations, but that's kind of, I just wanted you to know that basically I'm just showing you a PowerPoint presentation that I made. So here's the school I'm at, the James B. Edwards College of Dental Medicine. And so yeah, when I started teaching, when I had to take on the topic of teaching dental materials, again, it was not a very exciting topic to take on, but basically I needed to give it a makeover essentially. And so the makeover consisted of several things, but the things I want to talk about are what I did to improve the lectures, adding interactive components to it or interaction to it, and then also adding some finishing touches. And if you notice, it spells lift. So this is a way to uplift the class, if you will, and to make it a more palatable class. Because otherwise, it's an extremely dry topic. I mean, when I took the class, it was. I mean, the gentleman was very educational, but it was a very dry topic, and it's difficult to make it palatable. I see some raised hands. Is there something going on with audio, or is everything okay? Or am I talking too fast?
You're fine.
Okay, just making sure. All right. So let's start off with lectures. So when designing lectures, as librarians, you'd want to start looking at books. So let me start off with this first book here. And that's Brain Rules by John Medina. Now, John Medina is a molecular biologist. And in this book, he talks about 12 rules that cover how the brain works and how we can get the most out of it. It can be useful whether you're trying to teach, whether you're a student trying to learn, or just, trying to do what you need to do. And I'm going to talk about a couple of the rules that he mentions. One of them that's very relevant to what I want to talk about today is that rule number 4, we don't pay attention to boring things. So like those slides that I showed you earlier, where it's basically just text on the slide, it's just not that exciting. So another thing that he mentions, and I'll talk more about how to make the slides a little more engaging. The other thing he talks about is the 10-minute rule. And that basically, in general, people's attention spans are 10 minutes. So when you're designing your lectures, you want to think about them in 10-minute segments. In particular, you would start off your 10-minute segment with the main topic and then spend the next 9 minutes kind of explaining it, and then starting the next 10 minutes or so. Now, when you start that next 10 minutes, you need to have some kind of hook to bring your audience back in. So that could be presenting a problem, or what I like to do is to tell a story or play a video. So I'll give an example of a story that I'll tell. So when I'm talking about dentures, which are made out of methyl methacrylate material, I like to emphasize how great and durable how great the material is, but how fragile it can be. So this is an actual denture that I made in dental school, and literally right before I was about to turn it in, it dropped on the floor for about 3 feet, and the buccal flange broke, which is the little piece you see there broken off to the left. So I tell them this is the story, and if you want to do it in SCCIL language, you could do it. My denture was pretty, but fell on the floor. With low fracture toughness, a buccal flange was no more. So you can kind of see where we're going. So this would be a good way to introduce the topic of it, and then talk about fracture toughness and how it's not great in accident-prone patients, and then lead into a discussion of what you can do to make dentures more resilient for patients who may have more accidents with them. The other one I talk about is PowerPoint, and I also know there's Keynote out there as well. So I think a lot of this would apply, but there's a lot of people just say they hate PowerPoint, and my personal feeling is that if you hate PowerPoint, it may be that you're not using it right. For example, don't ever just stick with a template. I say when you get your PowerPoint template, just use some magic, clear it off, and then start with a blank slate and let your imagination run wild. Because when you're presenting, you're not just doing a digital version of transparency slides, if you remember those, but it can be a window to take your students on some sort of educational journey, if you will. So on that note, in terms of doing educational presentations, I'm going to bring in another book. Brain Rules. And the rule number 10 is vision trumps all other senses. And so basically just kind of focusing on the visual aspect of the slides. So to kind of give some research behind it, I was going to show this study from UC Santa Barbara. So basically in this study, they looked at applying principles described by Richard Mayer, who's an educational psychologist there, and basically it's applying multimedia principles and trying to make the slides more visually engaging, for lack of a better word. So some examples of that are doing a multimedia principle. We're using words and pictures rather than words alone, using the signaling principle, where basically you're just limiting it down to the pictures and some text, and then the speaker kind of fills in that information. Or the coherence principle, where you're excluding unnecessary information. So on the left, they're trying to be fun with some slides, with some images, but doesn't really relate to the images. So it's more, they're trying to show in the right image where it's kind of a little more to the point, with a nice illustration that kind of goes with it. So what they found when they did this study, they kind of did a pre and a post study. They had, trying to show what it was like with the students seeing the original presentation and then seeing it altered with the multimedia design principles. And in this first study, they found that multimedia design principles are easy to implement and result in improved short-term retention among medical students. So short-term retention is great, but obviously we want long-term retention as well. So they did follow up with another study, and basically they kind of did the same thing, took a presentation about shock, made it more visually engaging using the multimedia principles. And they did some tests And they saw that with the alter version, which is highlighted in orange here, or if you are visually impaired, it's the line that has little diamonds on it as opposed to squares. You can see that the retention was higher with that. So this is kind of the first evidence that applying multimedia design principles to an actual medical lecture design has significant efforts on measures of learner understanding, long-term transfer, and long-term retention. And this work reinforces the need to apply the science of learning and instruction in medical education. I want to take a side note. Thanks for the positive feedback in the chat. And also Canva is pretty cool. I've heard it's relatively new to me, but I'll have to play around with that some more. I think I used it to design some programs. So getting back to visually appealing presentations. Oh, and now that I mentioned brain rules, you can actually go online and go to YouTube and look for videos featuring John Medina if you want to learn a little bit more about it. But of course, the book is available on Amazon and your local library. So in terms of visually appealing presentations, here's the other book I was trying to get to earlier. And that's Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. And so I really love the aesthetics that he presents in this book. Even the book is visually appealing. So I highly recommend picking out a copy of this book or borrowing it from a friend, because in it he goes over design principles for making it more elegant and more effective, if you will. Yeah, I'm glad someone got the Reading Rainbow reference. I love me some Reading Rainbow. So in this book, he goes over basically the main gist of one of the main gist of his main points is the idea of simplicity. So let me give an example of that. So here's a slide from the dental amalgam lecture that I've been talking about. In case you're wondering, dental amalgam is the silver fillings that dentists can use when we're fixing a cavity. So here it just has a bullet point list about using a maximum force. So when you place this, you have to use a certain amount of force to ensure adequate condensation and thus adequate placement of the material. Otherwise, you'll get voids in it and you'll get sensitivity. It won't be good. So you can have a slide like this, or you could use a little magic and have something like this where it's kind of is ingraining in the person's head that you need to put a lot of force in it, 5 pounds at least, when you're placing this material. So that's kind of the idea of simplicity, just kind of simplifying it to what the information is that you need to know. On top of that, so earlier I presented the slide with bullet point lists. And frankly, sometimes you do have to do a bullet point list. Like if you're presenting medical history, you can't. But what I try to do whenever possible is to try to limit bullet point lists or eliminate them altogether. One way to do that is, so for example, in this slide where I'm talking about the things that are not so great about amalgam, instead of just kind of going over the list, then people start reading ahead of you, yada, yada, yada. What you can do is, or what I do is, I basically just make a slide for each bullet point. So you have an introduction slide and then a slide that talks about each topic. So here I talk about how you have to prepare extra tooth structure for mechanical retention. And then I talk about how obviously it does not look as pretty as a tooth colored filling, and so forth and so on. So you're probably wondering, well, if I do that, my presentation is going to be several hundred slides long. And yeah, that probably be the point. And I see in the chat, people are asking about, do you share the PowerPoint slides? I do, but I share a PDF version of it because, as you can see, there's sometimes copyright stuff in it, but also I purposely make handouts for them. So this actually segues into my next topic here. So when you're commenting that you need to print out your slides for that to be the handout, what you're doing is you're creating a slide document. It's neither a slide nor a document. It's a slide document, and it kind of limits what you can do here. So the way that Gar Reynolds suggests is to think about your presentation in 3 parts. The first part is the handouts. So this is the information that you give to the students. And so if you're wondering what I give, this is the main thing I want the students to have and what I want them to know. So if the information I want them to know is in the handout that is now we do it digitally. We hand it out to them. The second thing is the notes for you. So that's whatever slides that you may have, notes that you may have in front of you, or using presenter view in PowerPoint or Keynote. And the third is the slides for the audience. So now that you have the information on the handout, you also have the notes in front of you. You don't have to worry about putting that information on the slide. You can focus on your slide being a visual rather than just being prompts for your talk, or also just making sure the information is given to your students. So by thinking about your presentation in these 3 parts, the handout, the speaker notes, and the presentation slides, it helps give you, it ensures that your students get the information via the handout. It also helps you because you have your little notes in front of you, but it also allows your slides to be more, more visually engaging, because you don't have to worry about putting so much text on them. Because please don't put too much text on the slides. But anyway, those are the main tips from presentations. And just like John Medina and Brain Rules, you can also find some YouTube videos and some summaries if you so wish about presentations. And so I did see in the chat someone asked about where do you get your images from. So on that note, please definitely use high quality images. You don't want to use low quality images because that kind of takes away from your presentation. So where you can get those is obviously you can use stock companies like stockphoto.com. I personally, when I'm out and about, I just take pictures and tend to use them. And so a lot of the backgrounds you've seen in today's presentation are pictures I've taken on my various travels. You can also go to the Google as well. And it's obviously, you need to be careful about that because obviously some may not be able to be used for copyright reasons. Of course, educational fair use may come into play. So just be mindful of what that is. Also, Google has a filter where it can, you can see where it is tagged to be used publicly, but obviously usually the images are not as good. So generally I just take lots of pictures when I go out and travel. And now it's easier since I have a camera in my pocket all the time. And I'm going to take a swig of water here. And I would direct your attention to the chat because some people are giving suggestions for defined images. I think the website I used, particularly that camera one, it was from freeimages.com, but I don't know if it's still working. I haven't checked it lately. But pictures are great, but moving pictures are even better. Videos and presentations are great for a whole host of reasons.
They sure are, Joe. Why, I bet you regain the attention of some of your audience members right now by having me here.
And I'm glad you came because I think some people might be trying to shop on their phones.
Well, yes, it happens to the best of speakers, but videos can be a great tool to combat the non-attentive student. Since millennials tend to be more visually oriented, videos are a great way to illustrate and drive home a particular concept. They can also provide a much-needed change of pace to lectures and help break them up into manageable segments. And of course, who can forget the excitement when we were kids when the teacher rolled one of these into the rooms?
Oh yeah.
Why don't you show the audience some examples of how you use videos in your presentations? But I gotta get back to Epcot. I've got a fast pass for Soarin' and I'd hate to miss it. Bye everyone.
Bye Joe. Don't get the Delta variant while you're there. So anyway, I know, don't you just love, I love those TV carts when I was a student. That meant it was TV day. So an example of this, so here I'm trying to talk about dislocation motion, which is a property in metals. And this is how you get ductile behavior of metals, meaning you can kind of shape it. So if I'm showing a static image like this from a dental materials textbook, and I say, well, bonds are being broken and unbroken as you move these planes in opposite directions. And that thus allows it to be make it a malleable substance. It's kind of difficult to get that across. Well, thank goodness for the YouTubes, because I found this video and embedded into the PowerPoint, and you can see in the middle where bonds are being broken and unbroken and how that could lend itself to making a piece of metal and making it so you can shape it into whatever you need. So this is important for things like orthodontics, where wires are obviously very important. Earlier, I mentioned about talking about trying to tell a story when beginning a topic. So, for example, when I'm talking about denture lining materials, because fortunately dentures do not last forever, and at some point they will have to be replaced because tissues resorb, they break, what have you. So, to start off with denture lining materials, I like to show this video of situations that can occur when a denture is not realigned properly. Korea. Poor guy. So anyway, again, that's a great way to kind of to start a topic off and kind of start the discussion there. And a lot of my videos are from YouTube, and the newer versions of PowerPoint have really easy ways of embedding them into your PowerPoint. But I won't get into that. You can Google YouTube, insert videos, and you'll be able to find it. So that's kind of all I had to say about lectures. I mean, I have a lot more to say, but we only have so much time. But I do want to move on to the next one, which is interactive games. And I think this is kind of what helped take the class up another level, and it's just making it more interactive rather than just me doing a one-man monologue in front of them. One of the things that I've used various audience response systems. I've used Turning Point, and more recently I've been using Poll Everywhere because that's just what we have at MUSC. And I really like, and actually I use it during my lectures. It's a way for people to anonymously submit questions during it, but I also use it as a way to ask ask review questions throughout the lecture. And more recently, instead of doing like a quiz at the beginning of every class as a way to review the previous material, I try to make it a little more fun, and I try to use the competitions part of Poll Everywhere. So basically what it is you can create a series of questions, and it basically creates a game. People will answer the questions, and obviously if you get it right, you get more points. And the quicker you answer, you get more points. So it's very similar to HQ, which I don't know if it's still around, but it was a trivia app game, and it was kind of functioned in the same way. Basically, you answered a series of trivia questions. The faster you answered, you got more points. And obviously if you if you missed a question, you were out of the game. But this one, in competitions, people stay within the game, so it's okay. But basically, I kind of themed it around that, and of course, I had to throw a dental spin to it, so I called it Dental HQ. So basically, for most of the classes, I created a little game that I would start every class off with to review the material from the previous class. So this was a way of essentially doing a quiz, but trying to encourage them to stay on top of the material rather than binge watching it. Binging it before the class. I mean, binge watching is great for shows, but not so great when you're trying to study test material. So basically, as you can see, here's kind of the layout of one where basically it's a series of questions. And to also, as to add a little fun to it, I designed these stickers to give out to the winner of whoever won that day. And the response was really good, particularly that first year I did it. So in the middle of the semester, I asked them like things you want me to keep doing and things you don't want me to do. And a lot of people comment on how much they loved HQ, I guess, particularly because obviously it provided some great review questions as well. In terms of the end of the class survey, this was in spring of 2020. So that class had experienced half the class as I originally intended, where HQ was there, and then obviously the other half was virtual because of the pandemic. But overall, most people liked the the adding HQ to the course. In 2021, I kind of asked again. This past year, because I did all the classes pre-recorded, I mainly used them for test reviews, but even then, they still really liked those test reviews and doing it in the HQ style. But I think what's even more telling than the evaluations are seeing what students post on social media. And so these are a couple of stories that they posted, highlighting, they made it on the leaderboard or getting the stickers to do. So I took that as a good compliment. But anyway, this is this is using the competitions thing in Poll Everywhere, and the competitions can be adapted to other games as well. Other game things I've used evidence-based Jeopardy. So the way I use this is I break them up into teams, and using the free response version with whatever audience response, you can have them text in their answer, and so that kind of helps you tell who answered first. So that's one way to kind of do the buzzer without having buzzers. And you can find Jeopardy game templates out there. This is a really cool one I found. You're going to click on it, and it even includes like the audience cheering, like that. It includes the theme music, so forth and so on. So, but another one, here's the one I used to love and use a lot, and that is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? So for kicks and giggles out there in our virtual audience, the font size for text on a presentation slide should be no less than, is it 8, 14, 18, 24. Type in your final answers now in the chat. Give me 5 seconds here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lock in your final answers. The general rule I follow is I try to keep the font size at least 24, if not higher. And obviously this is going to vary on the room you're in, how large the room is, and things like that. But I try not to go lower than 24. The only reason I'll use less than 24 is for stuff like the YouTube link or just small little credit things that I don't want to take over the slide, if you will. So those are some fun ways of kind of adding interaction to your course. Last and certainly not least is the finishing touches, if you will. And as Dr. Lepko was mentioning earlier, I love Disney, and so a lot of what I do with these finishing touches I'm about to talk about come from me observing Disney and how they do things. It also comes from things like Sesame Street. Obviously that was a program that was geared towards, trying to educate children, but obviously doing it in a fun and engaging way. So one thing at Disney is they talk about you're not delivering a service, you're delivering an experience for your guests. And that's the same way I think about class. I'm not just giving a lecture, I'm delivering an experience to the students. And as Dr. Lepko mentioned, I have very much enjoyed musicals. So I approach it from a musical theater show background, from a view, if you will. So generally, I'd have like pre-show music playing. So like there's some instrumental music playing to kind of get people in a good mood. So some of my lectures do have an opening number where I try to live out my dream of being a Broadway performer, but unfortunately I'm a triple threat. I can't sing, dance, or act, so I perform on the classroom stage instead. But so, you know, obviously the way I think about it is, so say this ride over here on the left, this is like, you just need to get some information. And this ride is pretty basic, I think. Basically, you know, you're bringing the people up, bring them down, get some thrills from lifting off your seat. But Disney takes that to a whole new level and tells a story along with it, and pluses it, if you will. That's a term that Disney likes to use a lot, plussing. So they take this idea concept and tell a story around it. And the story begins as you're walking to it. This is the Tower Hotel. This is the Tower of Terror. So basically, you see it's 1939. Hollywood's the main elevator is broken, and so you're escorted to the service elevator. So something's gone wrong, and you obviously still get the thrill of going up and down multiple times, but it gives a nice, rich story behind it, and makes it a much more fun experience. At least I think so. When I been there. So as I mentioned, as Dr. Luck was mentioned earlier, I like to theme my presentations. And, you know, if we're going to quote some studies, here's one of my favorites. This was from Poppins et al. In 1964. And they said that in every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. So the other benefit of this is, you know, it gives me my dream of trying to be a performer, but also I think it's fun. It makes teaching this material, which is very dry, it makes it more fun for me. So certain lectures, I go so far as like, this also gives me excuse to buy certain things. Like this gave me an excuse to buy this Muppet here. This is Math and Materials Muppet. So there is actually a lecture where I do a Muppet just at the very beginning, not through the whole thing, because your arm gets tired. When you're talking about metals and dentistry, what better way to go than far, far, far away through the universe of Star Wars? And then what I'm most famous for is taking the students to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Dentistry, where Muggles are trained in the practice of the dental arts. So that's one of my favorite ones. So it gave me an excuse to go to the Wizarding World Harry Potter, purchase all the Gryffindor paraphernalia, and so I get to wear that 2 or 3 times a year. So obviously you're probably thinking that, well, that's a lot of work and stuff. And it is, but, you know, it kind of makes it more fun for me, and obviously can take it to another level. And I'm not saying you go out and buy Gryffindor robes, although I think you should. But, you know, have some fun with it. Obviously use your interest to as a way to theme your presentations. Now, this past spring was led to some issues because obviously we had to be virtual. And so I still kind of did the same theme lectures. I just pre-recorded them, but then I presented them in a streaming format. So I did a parodies. I called it Dentflix or Dental Plus, you know, instead of Netflix and Disney Plus. So I started each video with a little logo like that. And then also when I sent out emails telling them, hey, go read this, go watch this lecture, I do it as a parody of, you know, the emails you would get from Dentflix, from Netflix or from Disney Plus. So I thought that made it a little more fun. So stepping out of the Disney realm, something that you may have experienced is when you flew, probably not many of you have flown right now, but when you fly, you always have to hear that spiel about, you know, there are 6 exit wings on the plane, the 2 on there, that sort of thing. So that can be very boring and dry. So let me give you some other examples of ways that people have taken this basically lesson that they have to give their passengers and make it more fun and engaging. So this first one is from Southwest.
We're going to ask you at this time to direct your attention to the flight attendants. We're going to point out the safety features of the 737-700 series aircraft. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in the event that you have not been in an automobile since 1942, we're going to show you how to fasten the seatbelt. Watch closely. Do this. To unfasten it, you do that. That seatbelt needs to be low and tight across your hips, just like the hot pink Speedo I'm wearing tonight when we get to the hotel hot tub. Folks, you don't like the jokes of service tonight? 6 ways out of this airplane. Feel free.
Okay, I think you get the point. That's kind of a fun way of presenting it. Now, if you want to take it even up to another level, here is a way that Virgin America does their safety spiels, or at least they did.
I got some safety tips that you gotta know, and trust me, it's something that you wanna hear.
So honey, sip your lips and enjoy the show before we move into the stratosphere, yeah.
So won't you buckle your seatbelt, pull it down tight, and keep your in that chair until we turn off that light. Turn your electric on again. So tonight, get ready to fly.
Okay, I think you get the point. The other great thing about videos in your presentations is it gives you a chance to do a water break, and then not the whole class is not staring at you as you drink your water. So that's the other thing about it. So we've talked about enhancing the lectures, adding interaction components, and then of course adding some fun magical touches, finishing touches to it in the end. So let's look at the reveal of what the class looked like. So here are some videos that some students took of me and pictures and stuff. So overall, I mean, I think it's been fun. And hopefully you kind of enjoyed this presentation, because this presentation is kind of an example of how I would do a lecture, although hopefully preferably in person. But let's look at their reviews, if you will, because those will be the most telling. And I'm not doing this to, to brag about myself. That's very much not the point. But I do want to show that the students, the reason why I do all of this stuff, the students are getting the reason why I'm doing it, and also hopefully having some fun too. So for example, this is from more recent reviews. This says, in reference to me, knows how to make lectures fun and engaging. I wish all professors cared this much about their students to put all that work into making lectures that students actually wanted to attend and watch, especially with a subject that gets kind of dull. That is a true talent. Dr. V is I'll stop talking about myself. So basically, they made it fun and engaging, and it actually made them want to attend class. And that can be challenging, particularly in person, because I'll be honest, there's a class that's before mine. Sometimes they don't go to that class, but they will come back for my class. Here's another one. He always found a way to make what we were learning interesting. The effort never went unnoticed. I can guarantee that I wouldn't have enjoyed the class if it weren't for this professor. Not only was it interesting, but I also understood the concepts as opposed to having to memorize them. And that's the main key thing I take from this, that it helped them understand those concepts rather than going and memorizing some facts. This next one here, this touches my Disney heart. I found that I look forward to each class because they were always entertaining. The class itself reminds me of Disney World. Actually, every little detail is a very thought out and well done. And again, that's how Disney World inspires me. Like, there's pre-show music. The lectures is thought out. There's props and costume changes and whatnot. And there's also exit music as well, which I think adds a little more fun to it, I think. And this one here, while at times I would, so you're probably wondering, yes, it's a lot of work, and do all students enjoy it? Well, frankly, not everyone enjoys it. So I will be honest that sometimes some people don't like the theatrics that I do, and that's okay. You can't please everyone. But it's interesting to see this comment here. While at times I would become frustrated by the singing, dancing in the sense that it made lectures less efficient, I know that it helped other students to learn and remember the material. Because of this, I think that aspect of the course should definitely remain. So I'm glad that person recognizes that, there was a reason for all my crazy antics other than the fact that I wanted to be a Broadway performer. This other one said that the only complaint about the entire semester is to maybe switch back from the British accent in the amalgam lecture when you get to the content. So as you heard earlier, I'm not that great at doing a British accent. So I think that year I tried to challenge myself to do it throughout the whole thing, and obviously it did not go over well. But overall they enjoy it. But there are some comments where they don't, particularly at the end of the day. Sometimes the theatrics, they just want to hear the material and just kind of move on. So you're probably still going to get some of that as well. But that's kind of what all I had to say today. So I'll move over to any questions you may have, but I do want to say thank you for listening. Hopefully, I also want to thank the committee for inviting me here, because this is a fun topic I love to talk about. And so I'm really glad to share this with you. So thank you for joining me today on Extreme Class Makeover, and hope you found something that inspired you to use in your own classes. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vuthiganon, for
welcome.
this fascinating presentation. I am energized, and I'm ready to start making my content more visually pleasing by enhancing my lectures to make them fun and engaging, like you said, so I can make the students want to attend my classes. And I'll be using multimedia design principles, limiting bullet points, like you said, and breaking down classroom materials, and also using storytelling. But I will not use the Disney characters because I'm just not familiar with them. But, that was really interesting too. And all the theatricals, just to make, classes more palatable and engaging. And, we really enjoyed your presentation. I did. I actually was dancing when you played the Virgin Airline announcement.
I know, isn't it so catchy? Todrick Hall is awesome.
Yeah, I was dancing. I just couldn't help myself.
I know, actually, I was at a point where I was like, I need to stop playing this because I need to actually finish this talk on time. So.
Right. Yeah, and there are a lot of beautiful comments in here, but I think I'm going to go ahead and start with the questions that are in the Q&A.
Okay.
And so the first question from Patricia Anderson, and if I mess it up, Patricia, you can tell me. It says, she actually said she thought you might get to this later in the presentation, but I'm not sure you did. But she wanted to know how you work with cognitive load theory in your presentations and lectures, if you do at all.
So I'll be honest, I don't know exactly what I mean. I get a rough idea, but let me just look up a cognitive load theory. Refers to the used amount of working memory sources. So I guess honestly, I'm not as aware of it, so I don't really use that in my presentations. But I guess you're getting at the fact of, unfortunately, I'm just not as familiar with that, so I don't really incorporate that in my presentations. But I would love to learn more about it.
Okay. All right. And then the second question from Shona, it says, when you present your PowerPoint, do you use the desktop app or the online app? If you have a preference between the two, can you explain why, please?
So I use the desktop app, and frankly, I haven't messed with the online app. I'm reluctant to use something like that because I worry about, because as you saw in my presentation, I use a lot of special fonts and videos, and I particularly we do a lot of Teams here. When you transfer presentations into there, you lose formatting, you lose fonts, and videos may not work. So that would be my reason for not wanting to use an online version of PowerPoint. Just using what's on my computer, because I know when it's on my computer, it's going to display correctly. And that's generally when I go to any classrooms. I rarely use the lectern computer. I always use my laptop to make sure that everything's working right. And then I just have to learn how to correct it with the proper dongles and whatnot.
Thank you. Another question. When do you provide the handout? Before class or after? Oh, and the PowerPoint, do you provide it as a PowerPoint or a PDF?
So the handout is available on our LMS page, and it's usually available before the lecture. The PowerPoint PDFs, they are redacted versions of it, so I remove any copyrighted images and whatnot, and just focuses on what's relevant. And I don't post it until afterwards because I don't want it. Because sometimes even when I take all that stuff out, it'll give a hint of what the theme is for the day, and I want them to be surprised when they come in.
Right. Thank you. Another question from Patricia. I know that dental students tend to have fewer accessibility needs than other programs because, true, we don't actually admit blind, dental students because it just wouldn't work. But have you done any thought around using these multimedia strategies in the context of accessibility?
So, I have in terms of, I try to be mindful, particularly with text, obviously in those strategies, you're trying to minimize the text, but obviously you want to make sure the text is readable. You don't want to have particularly red text is particularly when we're trying to make documents accessible. You don't want to have red text, so I try to limit that unless it's absolutely necessary. Actually, I don't think I use red text very much because it just looks weird no matter what background you put it on. And then obviously trying to have dark color fonts on a dark background. Actually, part of the reason I'm using the lighter version is because if not, since I have dark hair, I basically just blend in with the darker background. So,
right. Another question from Margaret Henderson. How much extra time does it take you to prepare for your classes between the themes and separate handouts?
I'll be honest, it takes a lot of time. I think if a 1 hour lecture will probably at least 3 hours on the flip side. And it's so I'll be frank, it's a lot of work, but as much as Disney talks about magic is just kind of doing more than what a normal person would do. And so that's kind of how I justify it. I think the results kind of justify all the work that puts into it. But yeah, I'll be honest, trying to do a lot of this, it's going to take a lot of extra time. But I think it's worth it in the end. And if you only have 1 or 2 lectures, hopefully it won't be too bad. Trying to do 16 was a lot more challenging.
Right. And I think you've already answered this question about accessibility in multimedia.
Yeah, and also the things like I do provide links to any of the YouTube videos so they could watch that, and presumably they're captioned. And then, particularly this past year when we're doing pre-recorded, obviously added captions to it as well. Trying to think of other accessibility issues. Obviously making sure that the handouts are digitally accessible as well, using the Ally feature of Harbor back then, but obviously Microsoft Word has that now.
Right. Oh, and there's a comment from Patricia that you actually use the cognitive load theory in a lot of your multimedia.
You know it.
I know.
I've got it right here. I'm going to read more about it. So thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Patricia, for telling about that, because I want to learn more about that and see how I can maybe use it more in the future.
And then we have a question from Paul. Do you ever run into issues with the chosen themes? I'm thinking of some of my international students not understanding references or certain themes upsetting students. For example, Harry Potter for
myriad reasons.
Myriad reasons.
Yeah, so I have not, and obviously I'm choosing themes that I enjoy, but I also don't want to make these presentations new every year. So I started picking things that had proven to be lasting. So Star Wars is something that has lasted since the 70s. I think Harry Potter, they built several theme park areas based on it. But I understand that some people, I know what you're referring to with Harry Potter, but I haven't had any students express any comments in that regard. But obviously, I think you bring up a good point, is knowing your audience, because there are certain things I throw in that I do also wonder if my students will get it. For example, the TV on a cart, there's going to be some point where that's not going to make sense to people. I remember there was another slide where I was using the theme music from Family Ties, and I doubt anyone in that class has ever watched Family Ties, but that was an old show I like. But I try to pick stuff that's kind of lasting, and that's kind of how I use the theme parks, because if they're not going to build something that's going to last for a couple of years, they want it to last a long time. So I try to pick themes that were related to that.
Okay, we are kind of running out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Last question. No, it's not you. Where do you obtain your images? Do you pay copyright fees to use them?
I do not. So a lot of them I just use, I take pictures on my own. So the ones that are copyrighted, I use them, so I assume it falls under fair use because I don't redistribute them. So when the PowerPoints are given to the students, they're only done in PDF form, and I take out those copyrighted images.
Right. Okay. Wow, we still got more questions, but I don't know. I'm going to defer to the chair if the chair wants us to continue or to go into the.
I was going to say, Joe, if there's a contact point that you could give out for some of these questions,
sure,
like an email or something, I think that would be wonderful.
Oh, sure. I'll type it in the chat right now.
Thank you.